Thank you so much, Rafael. This was very inspirational and a high bar for us, I think, in the brain positivity panel now. Let me invite the speakers for what is the final session of the day before we conclude the summit. So, Jackie Brassey, Director Healthy Workforces and Director of Research Science at the McKinsey Health Institute. Please, you can choose. It's I think one seat is reserved, but other than that, it's a free country. So Linda Jarnhamn, Under and Managing Director, Flow to Thrive. Warm welcome. Lawrence Jones, Founder and Managing Director of NOTORA Ventures. Warm welcome, Lawrence. Please, let's do a mix. Yeah. Krystal Sexton, founder and CEO of Cognitive Capital Group. And last but not least, François Veron, General Partner at Newfund. Warm welcome to all of you. So we spend most of the time today discussing the macro level picture when it comes to the brain economy. But this discussion would not be complete without us tackling the level of the organization and especially the level of the workplace, because this is where the brain positivity needs to express itself most, and this is what is not going to happen by itself. So what I would suggest as a flow of our discussion is, first of all, to find the rationale for identifying the importance of brain health in organizations, in the workplace especially, then discussing how we can measure and monitor brain health, what tools do we have for that, what solutions exist for enhancing our cognitive performance and mental health, and lastly, how we integrate all that in the culture of the organization. I hope that simple and straightforward structure is to your liking. So I would start with the question why we're doing it, right? What is the rationale for prioritizing brain health in the workplace from the perspective of the well-being of the individual, but also of organizational vitality? So I don't know who would like to start. Jackie, maybe I will ask you.
Yeah, very happy to share a few reflections on that. Why is this important and why now? I would say it was already important yesterday. We have at McKinsey Health Institute a lot of data about how employees experience the workplace, how they experience their holistic health and burnout symptoms. And we know that today, at least 1 in 5 of employees are experiencing burnout symptoms. And I want to take a minute to explain what we mean by burnout symptoms, because it's a concept very closely related to having brain capital or not. The way we measured it, we look at 4 elements of burnout symptoms, which includes mental distance, emotional and cognitive impairment, and exhaustion. And exhaustion levels are much higher than 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4, because in the boardrooms and with teams where I measure it often, since the last time we studied in 30 countries, I reach levels regularly at 70% of exhaustion. Now, if we now know that in the next 5 years, with the rewiring of the organization and the transformation that we're going through, where we bring agents and robots into the ways of working and ongoing change, this is the ground that we start from. We're going to hit a concept even stronger than ever before that we call the adaptability paradox. But that's for later. So it's important to get ourselves ready to actually go through the transformation in the right way, because it's important for people and employees, and in addition, we also know it's good for business. There is a business case, which I know we also will talk about, but I'll leave it here. We have an important starting point, but even more important because we know what's coming.
Very good. Thank you so much, Jackie. Any other elements of the rationale, first of all, for doing this in the first place? Lawrence, Linda.
Anybody?
No, that's it's really. If you want to chip in on this one, please do. And yes, please, Linda.
No, just checking. Super. No, I think it's in a way it's very, very simple. We spend about 40 plus years at work, and the workplace is one of the largest lever of individual and population health overall. And I think primarily there are three reasons, I would say, why is this important for organizations. Number one, there is now a clear link between individual health, individual performance, and organizational success and performance. That's undisputable. So it's understanding that link and actually acting on that link. We've had 20 years of exponential technology change, and we've had tens and thousands of years of absolutely pretty much no change to the human brain. We've pretty much perfected unhealthy and unproductive working habits. And the result of that, I can't remember who it was who showed the slide earlier, is that the human contribution to productivity growth over the same period of time is pretty much flat. And with the increasing ratio, changing ratio of humans to AI, we have a massive risk of doing nothing and having significant consequences of that, of us human beings being the major blocker to progress. So I think there are some significant rationale for why organizations should start focusing on this.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I agree with them, and I think one thing I would add is, workplaces have had well-being programs in place for quite a long time. And it's very hard to divorce risk factors for physical health from mental health, from brain health, because of the interplay across our incredibly complex bodies. But work as a determinant of health is a relatively new concept compared to that. And the role of the organizational culture itself in our brain health is also becoming more and more clear. And I think the more we speak to leaders about that, and the more we take it out of being a, quote, program with some sort of check-the-box exercise, and the more we make it about the fabric of the culture of the organization, the further reach we'll have.
Excellent. Lawrence?
So first, thanks again for inviting me. I'm always the odd person when I come to these conferences because I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't come from this industry, but I still like this industry, so you guys are still nice to me. Because I come from the energy industry, and for me, it's looking at what can the energy industry learn from the brain economy industry. I think what's important, and what the three speakers have already said, there's one aspect for me that I think is important, is that we should not look at workplace just from in the workplace. Most of the people I engage with work out in the field. They're electrical engineers, they're outdoor workers. So we have to sort of think about how do we get them into this conversation. So when we say workplace, it's not just the built environment, it's also the outdoor environment. And I think the element that I think is important to bring it up here, I was just telling Krystal and Jackie earlier on, I'm currently working on a paper entitled Brain Capital for the Boardroom. And the focus there is how do you elevate this conversation, not just for the organization, but also for the board. And so I think it's important to put it in there, and I'll have a few more comments later on, but I think that's why it's important for me at least.
Can you reveal a little bit more about what's your thinking when it comes to the priorities for the boardroom?
Yeah, so the reason why it got me thinking about this was at the last UN conference in New York, I was a little bit concerned that the audience was probably 75% neuroscientists, maybe 2 engineers, and the others were just all, general people. And I discovered that I've been to 4 or 5 other brain events, and the trend doesn't seem to change. And so the challenge we have is, as we're trying to sell brain capital, brain economy to the organizations, those organizations answer up to the board. And so if we can get in front of the board and change the balance sheet from just looking at assets financial, but let there be 1 or 2 sections or 1 section dedicated to the brain, so that because we say the workers are, the brain capital. So if I'm doing my annual report as a corporation, I want to factor in the workers. But I challenge anyone here today, go and read every annual report of all the large Fortune 500 companies. There's not a single section dedicated to the brain or to brain capital. So that's why I think we need to have it in front of the board. So let it be part of the annual report.
Yeah, great. And François, what is the rationale from your point of view?
Maybe I will echo what Lawrence just said and saying a word of our fundraising at Newfund HECA. At the beginning, I was absolutely convinced that it would be a hit among companies, corporations, because there was this mental health crisis raising the unmet COVID expectations and so on and so forth. And it was a complete failure. One executive, number 2 in a very large French bank, even told me, well, François, do you think we're snowflakes? We're not made of sugar. So so it was not 2026, let's say it's 2024. We're 2024 and we still have this kind of reflection. Maybe France is very archaic in these dimensions, but there are probably places where the idea that we have to tackle this issue is absolutely controversial because there is a huge part of denial. And hopefully we managed to raise the fund, but thanks to private people investing their own money, we shouldn't, I think, we're convinced here, but the outside world, it's not that people don't understand the problem, it's probably 2 things. First, they don't want to share their understanding of the problem because at some point it's what do you think is normal, what's the baseline? And second, probably it's very difficult as an organization to face this question before having a beginning of answer. And maybe I'm transitioning to the other points of your...
In a very eloquent way as well. But I think you made an extremely valid point that we should not assume for a moment that the logic of thinking that we represent here, I think, around the table is widely shared, right? I think it's more of a pioneering process that needs to be pursued to gain traction and to gain understanding and then also buy-in on behalf of organizations. I would add to all elements of the rationale which you mentioned, also a pre-medical rationale, because as we know from studies, up to 45% of patients who are admitted to hospitals at the age of 65 have mild cognitive impairment. And if that's the case, this means we have to shift the burden of proof much earlier in life, and that means to the workplace, because that's where we spend most of our time prior to 65, 70, and so on. So there is a pre-medical reason also to be there. Now, the second area that I wanted to explore is how good are we already at measuring brain capital in the workplace? And Lawrence suggested taking it all the way to the balance sheet. So if it was part of the balance sheet, and the question becomes, how exactly do you express it? So, Linda, maybe I'll start with you because you work with companies on brain health and these issues. So, what types of measurements frameworks exist in a nutshell? I mean, you could give a lecture on that, but in a nutshell, and is there a significant gap that needs to be covered?
I think there are a number of frameworks out there, absolutely. McKinsey has one. Flow to Thrive that I run, we have one, neuroscience-based method, very holistic tool. I think the key is, where is the market in regards to this? And we did a big piece of work on literally vacuuming the market in terms of this last year. And I think the conclusion I draw there was that there's a mix between fascination and fear. Leaders are fascinated by the data, starting to understand that they need the data, but somewhat fearful of actually receiving the data and taking action on it. And I think that's where we here in the room have a massive role. I think a lot of companies think they are collecting data. I'm confident that the vast majority collect the wrong type of data and not the data that actually is linked to brain health and cognitive performance optimization.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I have two comments to your, to your question. First, sort of upstream of that, I think we have a bit of a nomenclature issue as well. So there's a lot of confusion over what is brain health to start with. And then you bring in brain capital, and then you bring in brain economy. So before we get to measurement, I think we need to have a clear definition that's kind of universally recognized, and we're just not there at the moment. With regard to assessments that are available, I just recently had to do a market scan, and there are not a lot. I mean, I would say fewer than a handful. And those that are evidence-based are even fewer. So, I mean, besides the two that Linda mentioned, I think only the Center for Brain Health coming out of Dallas in the US has a validated measurement tool. And even so, some of these are focused only on cognition or only on one component of brain health. And looking at brain health much more comprehensively is a very big challenge we haven't yet conquered.
Jackie?
Yeah, I feel so fortunate to be on the panel with all these amazing people and learn from my colleagues. And building on that, I think, echoing what was already said, I think there is much more possible. And I think especially we can also look at brain health for the balance sheet through the eyes of how much do we invest of our people budget in learning and development, for example, right? What is that proportion? Where do we invest it? That's another triangulation of what we do as an organization. I think another opportunity that may arise now, other than the old-fashioned way of measuring, that's a lot happening in organizations, is surveys, right? Experience, asking people questions, which I don't think goes away. But what maybe is the opportunity now that we build more systems and technology, we can actually triangulate with objective data much better than before. And I will tell you a bit later about 5 principles. It's a sneak preview I'll give. It's not out. It will be out in a couple of weeks. Around 5 principles of how you design the workplace with brain capital at the core in this new world of AI, which is that you actually start to think about, well, what do the systems need to prompt for? What do they need to ask for? What do we actually need to look at in engagement with the systems? And so I am hopeful more will emerge, so that we can understand the cognitive load and cognitive capacity, etc. But we're not there yet. And the beautiful experiments that we already heard about today are not so scalable yet, right? So yeah, there's a road to go, but there is more. And also building on what Krystal just said, that there is maybe in the validated the quality of validated instruments is not massive. That actually encourages us to build the validated tools. But also I would say don't stop doing things and start working on it and make it better. Because some people, some organizations are paralyzed because they don't know and survey fatigue, etc. Anyway, I'll keep it there.
Can I just add a comment? And I did promise someone in the audience I was going to be a little bit contrarian, but that's my name. Shocking, I know that, but not a contrarian. But I'm a little bit worried that this industry should not make the mistake we made on climate in terms of being so focused on finding unified universal metrics. Because if you get bogged down on that, we saw it when it came to climate ESG reporting, it became a nightmare, the European standard, the American standard, this is one thing that scares the board. So my recommendation would be, look, Krista, if you're dealing with your client and you're showing them certain qualitative information that will convince the board to invest, fine. Linda, the same. Jackie, the same. If the 3 of you spend so much time trying to harmonize one definition or one metric, we'll have the same problem we had on climate because there will not be agreement, and then that will just confuse the board. So I know it sounds weird, but it's a good opportunity for consultants because guess what? There's no universal metric. The thing that is qualitatively true is that you can see and you can tell a client, look at the results for your organization. Linda may go to 5 different Swedish companies and they may all have different set of metrics for their company because they're measuring different things. I think that's okay, but I don't want us to lose momentum in this industry by fighting over what should be the best standard that everybody will agree upon. We don't need kumbaya here.
Okay, so that means 100 flowers blossoming, as Chairman Mao would have put it. Namely, it's an important point, I think. It's about the logic also of the approach. Is it more compliance-driven? Is it to be more compliance-driven, namely you establish criteria such as the ESGs and then you exert compliance? It's one way of going about it. And the other way of going about it is more bottom-up, building a culture of understanding where different approaches can be equally valid, right? Please, yeah.
Can I add a but? Because I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I don't think it's okay to collect any and report on any type of data, because that is the problem. That at the moment, organizations are spending time and effort collecting and reporting on data in their annual reports, in ESG reports, on factors that actually don't correlate with shareholder value. There's a brilliant organization in the US called Irrational Capital that's done a lot of work related to this. Their conclusion is very similar to conclusion I've drawn from the data that I have, that if you look at the factors companies spend time on, compensation and report on, compensation, benefits, training hours, diversity and inclusion, etc. I'm not saying they're not important, they are, but they don't actually show a strong link with shareholder performance. Purpose, meaning, belonging, psychological safety and trust do. They have a strong correlation with shareholder performance or share price performance, and they also are illustrative of a foundation for change to other more brain healthy habits and factors in the organization. That's why I disagree with you.
We didn't disagree. You actually said it better than I did. We're in agreement.
Okay.
Because what you said actually is exactly the problem we have. So electricity, we measure reliability, right? If you go to different utilities, they may talk reliability, but they may measure different things. So qualitatively, we're on the same page, except that quantitatively, you may be measuring other things as part of that qualitative nature. So I would never disagree with Linda. No, I would never do that.
Yes, wonderful.
Can I build?
Please, and by the way, I'm going to invite also questions and comments. So if you have one, raise your hand. But Jackie.
Yeah, because there's one other nuance that we found in our research that I wanted to add. First of all, I think it's not so much the strict one thing, everybody should measure the same thing, but if you measure something, do it in a valid way and good quality. Because what we are seeing when we talk to HR leaders all over the world, they think they have an engagement survey, they measure engagement, and that's well-being, and that's it, and that's good, and they keep track of that. If they have a big problem with burnout, they are not solving the problem by solving for engagement. Because there are different drivers for engagement than there are for solving for burnout. And so if you really want to invest in the right way, you need to know what problem you are solving, and you do that by measuring the right thing. And so you invest better instead of more, right? I don't know, Krystal, I know you are passionate about this too.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think you also know my soapbox that we can't just measure just the individual and think we're going to see some sort of monumental change here. Because you talk about work as a determinant of health, you have to measure those organizational factors as well. And those organizational factors like managerial support and organizational culture and psychological safety, Linda mentioned, et cetera, are all evidence-based, and they all drive individual health, which then all drive business outcomes, right? So there's a wealth of evidence out there about that. So I don't think it's, you are my friend and I think you're wonderful, but I am disagreeing with you as well.
I want to bring in François, and then
Please, François, help me on this.
François has to be the mediator in the room here. No, but François is an investor, and I want to ask him, well, two questions. One is about whether, from the investor's point of view, I mean, what is it that he would consider to be of utmost relevance? He will come later on solutions, because I know he has a strong interest in the field. But maybe more broadly, from the point of view of when assessing the bids that come your way, what factors would you really consider to be relevant?
So we're investing in startups. Of course, it's a very peculiar organization. I would say that the purpose often is not, at least in the first years, contested, because it's what a startup has very clearly. The organization is a mess, and often it's very chaotic. So the integration of the people inside the way they can contribute to the purpose is something that is sometimes very challenging. So what we're doing, and it has been recently systematized, is that we propose to the founders, so let's say 3-4 main shareholders, managers of the company, to pass some tests, not cognitive tests, not testing if they're good or bad, but testing how they collaborate, how they sort of see the world. Are they more open to ideas, or do they like to decide or not to decide, or is morality important? What do they have an internal framework, and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit MBTI, but sort of reviewed. And it's very interesting. We use it as a tool of dialogue to understand if the founders are going to correlate positively. And I think that for startups, founders that are not too much dysfunctional is a first step, and that can be measured. That can be measured.
Well taken. So let me invite Chiara to take the floor.
Thank you so much. Just had a very quick question. I'm joining this panel so much. I'm sure that everybody is with me. It's very entertaining. Thank you. I would just like to try and connect what you're discussing in this panel with some of the things were said this morning, especially what Rim presented with the Brain Capital Index. At the end of her presentation, she talked about what she called the execution gap. So the fact that even if on average in a population skills can be quite high, the execution of plenty of things, or the performance, it's very poor, can be poor because it's mediated by plenty of things, including engagement, psychological safety, etc. And so I have a very annoying and naive question, but in your amazing jobs, in your work, have you tried to basically really measure this gap at the organizational level? So look at the skills of workers, and then inter-individually look at how this translates in performance. Because at the end of the day, I think this is at the core of a brain positive organization. It's about how we give our best, how we can optimize our skills so that, you know, at the organizational level, it's a functional organization.
Thanks so much. And if you have come across such measurements, then I think Rim, who is on the back, would be eager to integrate it in demonstrating, you know, the execution gap and how it evolves.
Let me give one example. So every grid around the world is operated. There's a control center. People work 24/7. And it's a very stressful environment. And a couple of years ago in the US, I was involved in a project where the idea was how to increase operators' performance. And what was done there was, the first complaint the operators had was information overload. The other complaint they had was they were given too many tasks by too many supervisors. And what we saw, I won't name the utilities, a big one in the Midwest, by removing and reducing the information that was presented to the operators, you saw their performance go up. It was natural because they were more relaxed, they were making better decisions. The other thing that we did was, instead of them getting instructions from so many supervisors, we were able to sort of streamline how many supervisors were giving them, you know, instructions. So not necessarily what Rim was talking about, but I think there we could see clearly that when you remove certain factors that have a cognitive impairment, like information overload in that environment, you saw an improvement in the performance of those operators. And the same thing with air traffic controllers and pilots. Yep. We saw what happened during the government shutdown in the US. A lot of them were burned out, and by the time you were able to give them that space to give them their salary, their performance changed just by not knowing, I don't have to worry about my salary, I knew it was there. So those are some of the things, you know, at least I've seen that have helped.
Yep.
I mean, I can add, we don't measure skills gap, we measure what I call performance, productivity, potential gaps, or the gap between what a person can potentially ultimately achieve and what they actually deliver. And I think with AI, an increasing use of AI, the value of skills, traditional skills, they're changing, but traditional technical competences, the value of that will massively be reduced. So what we need to understand is how to optimize how we're using our brain and the energy of our brains so that we're closing that performance gap and can really optimize our own thinking and performance. So that's what we focus on.
Great. So before we go to solutions, I want to ask one question which relates to another data point which we heard in the morning, namely the one on prevention, right? Shifting from 45 to 75%, as Bill explained in his presentation. So first of all, do you see the workplace as an arena where prevention policies can be made more mainstream? Or is it completely out of scope for companies and organizations, right? Because they are not, no, they are not designed, that's not maybe in the immediate shareholder value, right? And also the pre-medical aspect, namely, since we have the origin of the disorders coming much later in the case of brain conditions, is there a scope for the enterprise and organization to be involved in that pre-medical screening as well? Any thoughts on that? And once we have the answers, we'll move to the solutions.
So I'll take a stab at that first. I'm an epidemiologist by training, so I love to talk about prevention of things, and I think we tend to measure things too late in the process, particularly in the workplace. So I think there's a huge opportunity on the prevention side, especially because the workforce is working later and later across the entire world. But I mentioned the organizational factors, several of us mentioned those earlier. Those are ways to prevent negative outcomes, and especially if you look at something like burnout, you can see the role of the manager, of the peers, of the team dynamics in the health of the individuals and as a team as a whole. So I do think that we have to for me personally, have a bigger magnifying glass on the prevention conversation rather than talking about brain health in the sense of poor brain health or dementia or clinical diagnosis already.
Excellent. So if we are ready, although I did see, I saw lots of questions. And what do we do now? Well, with 15 minutes left, we can try now. I mean, let's collect the questions, right? Let's collect the questions.
Hi, my name is Gwen. I'm researching decision-making in the workplace. But my question here is that we talk about burnout, and we often don't think about the personal, the psychosocial factors that are behind that. So, for example, I worked with a company. There's one manager who had every 2 years burnout, and we couldn't figure out why. And then we learned that his wife had a serious health condition that was chronic. His daughter was suicidal, and so on. So do you in any way in your data account for those personal problems? Because the old way is that we believe that people leave their personal problems at the front door of their office, but reality is it's, one body.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Here.
Thank you. I'm Roxanne. I'm the founder of a research and advisory practice based in London. So recently I did a research study with 300 UK employees in organisations that have introduced AI tools. And the findings were a bit concerning. I think you can see a bit of an erosion of brain capital, particularly some early signs of cognitive dependency on AI, about 41% finding tasks harder without AI. And I think through my work with organizations, I think some are open to this, but a lot of them are just focusing on, the current moment, reactive, focusing on tracking usage, and kind of, making sure that people use it as much as possible. So I think the question is more, are there any sort of ways, I think, from your work in terms of getting employers engaged with this conversation? I know this kind of leans more towards the brain skills rather than brain health, but whether this is kind of an opportunity to kind of get employers a bit more on board is just a thought.
Perfect. So let me complete this side of the room.
Thank you, Thomas Pauls. I've done work with energy and fast-moving consumer goods, and I find in the conversations you have with the board around let's do this, the enthusiasm is there, and then there's the immediate fear because everything is wrapped in care and psychological safety, and we should be nice to each other and help each other, which is all true, but in the end we want to manage performance. And for most line leaders who play a huge role, it's like an impossible mix of things to do at the same time. How am I nice and caring and giving you psychological safety and still tell you you are bad at your job and need to improve your performance? Where does my belonging and meaning go in that scenario? So maybe you could reflect a bit on what we can do in terms of advice to these boardrooms of how to balance that, and that this is not something that you go down the rabbit hole of the care trap.
Yeah, great questions, by the way, and reflections. So I hope you are. You can't remember the question. You can remember. So, no, okay.
This is brain unhealthy.
So
cognitive overload.
Brain positive moderator now invites the panelists to answer, and then we will continue.
So which question shall we pick first?
Jackie, pick the one that you find most...
To answer maybe this first question of the lady here around the workplace factors, and actually that there is more than work that impacts burnout symptoms. We actually, if it's of interest, we built a predictive model on the workplace factors on outcomes like holistic health and burnout. That's a study from 2023 in 30 countries, and it looks at all the different factors, both on the demand sides of work and enabler sides of work. But what we didn't do is boil the ocean and bring also personal questions into that model. However, what we know is, of course, they matter. The predictive model that looked at the impact of the workplace on burnout symptoms was explained 69% of its variance. The model that predicted holistic health predicted 49% of its variance. It's very clear that there is more, of course, that plays onto that. But what we do know from the experience that we have in changing organizational settings is that if you create those drivers of holistic health and burnout, which includes, actually let me mention a few. A key driver for burnout symptoms is toxic workplace behavior. If you have that and a person has personal issues, it's a perfect mix of challenges, right? People go into a state of burnout. They can have much more if the workplace creates a place where there is no toxic workplace behavior, where there is less role ambiguity, where there's less role conflict. And on the positive side, also to what Krystal already mentioned, where there is meaningful work, where there's a sense of belonging, where there is psychological safety and so on. So if you create healthy workplaces, you create much more buffer to catch up for those life challenges. And that also helps, I keep saying it because I get pushed a lot, it is not only good for the people, it's good for the business. So it is very relevant without having to know and take the responsibility as an organization about everybody's personal life. So that's one answer. And I would love to answer another question, and then is that okay? And then I'll hand over to you, because I don't want to be egoistic here and take them all. I'm very passionate about this AI question, and that is exactly why we are actually in a couple of weeks will publish a couple of ideas, because we, like many organizations, what we are seeing is that we're very good in designing the technical side, right? And then we think a lot about how we do change of behavior, but we forget the brain. So we say human impact of AI is limited by human capacity, not by technology, because technology can go, if we solve the energy problem, technology can do a lot. So what have we seen? What is missing is to create, and we call them the 5 principles to design workplaces with brain capital at the core, is to design and calibrate cognitive load, which means think about not overloading people, not underloading people. So it's design what the brain is asked to do. Protecting cognitive capacity, which is protecting what the brain has to give. And there are all kinds of interventions behind this. Build adaptive brain skills. We talk already about this, and this gentleman at the back also said, how do you have difficult conversations? How do you hold people accountable? How do you create stretch and care? And that's a skill. And you can train that. Honestly, I have a team, and my team member, Imad, is here. He knows we have a lot of belly laughs, but if he's doing a crappy job, I can honestly tell him. I'm also Dutch, but he appreciates that. But that is actually because we have created this sense of connection. So it's possible, and that's really important to do, and it's not fluffy, what we're talking about. The fourth principle is about enabling focus. How do we create a workplace where we not constantly switch between all these systems, and we have Slack, and we have this, and we have that? How do we actually create a different way of working? And the fifth is about this brain-positive environment that we need to create. So what you say is very relevant, and therefore we need to call for intentionally changing how we work. When do we offload our brain to the system, and when do we actually say, now we think first? Especially, and that's the last thing I'll say, and then I hand over to my colleagues. I talked about the adaptability paradox at the beginning of our conversation. We are moving to environments where we are in high-stakes situations with unfamiliar territory, so a lot of unpredictability. And our brains are designed to keep us safe and also to preserve energy. As I'm preaching to the converted, many of you are neuroscientists. But if we are then under pressure, we actually revert to what we know, what we have in our backpack. And so we need to work in a different way, but it's very difficult to do in those situations. That's where the paradox comes from. So we need to intentionally design skills that actually stop us from working in the old way, but also intentionally design the systems that help us think better. And I'll pause here because I can talk about this for an hour, and yes, I'm not sure if I make sense. But
we have to make it a concluding round.
Sorry for that. Then.
We are coming to a close. And what I would like to ask you all to reflect upon is how do we integrate all these elements at the level of the culture of the organization, right? So it's a task that will be with us for some time, but I would welcome your thoughts on the issue. François, can we start with you?
Thank you, and it's a way also to reflect on the, let's say, humanity versus performance dilemma. I think it's really a journey. We don't know where we'll be in 1 year, 2 years, and so the relationship between, let's say, the workforce management, the board, is completely different. Strategy used to be, I show you the direction and then everybody executes. It's no more the case. And it's going to be less and less the case, and maybe tomorrow the board decision would be to allocate tokens to high performers. And what are high performers? How you're going to justify to have this access to knowledge in the form of token and particular expenses. So a lot of things will change. That brings us back to the adaptability paradox, and I think that the human factor that was mentioned previously by Kara is absolutely critical. Don't believe that technology itself will bring the solution. We are Homo sapiens, and we'll collaborate to find the right solution.
So I just want to make two comments. So one thing we haven't talked about in terms of the environment is we haven't talked about nature, how important it is. And I bring this up because who all came here by taking the flight that was longer than 6 hours? 6 hours flight. Okay, so all of you might be jet lag, right? So here's the issue. We talk about workforce, or we talk about the workplace. For me, my workplace is an airplane. So for me, prevention is very important. So I think one way to get the idea of cognitive health for people to understand, almost every CEO takes a long distance flight. So when I'm talking to them, I say, look, when you land, you're exhausted. You don't realize you're burning yourself out. So my solution is talk to people where they are when it comes to their own cognitive health. So I've gotten chairman of the boards of organizations to now begin to use this technology I'm using that's called Newcom, and it has helped them to see their performance go up because when they're using technology that allows them to get enough rest when they land, their performance goes up. So you have to personalize the issue with the board and with the CEOs. Let them know that, look, you look healthy, but your brain health sucks. How do you know, Lawrence? I know because you had only 3 hours of sleep. You were at the bar all last night. You got to make it personal with the board and with the CEOs. Otherwise, they're not going to take this personal. Like she said, pain drives change. So let them know that Long-distance flights are not good for you, Mr. CEO, and improve your health. The next thing you know, he will try to improve the health of his staff. So nature and prevention.
Great. Thank you so much. Krystal?
I'll make this fast. I have 2 comments, though. One, I spent 15 years in the corporate space doing this work, and one of the things that I think will forever prevent us from moving forward is if the corporate space continues to be so proprietary and refusing to share results, successes, failures, all of it, because people do spend the majority of their adult time at work. And so if we're too busy protecting the corporate world, then we're not going to make much advancement in this space that we're talking about, particularly in the prevention side I'm so passionate about. The second thing is, I've been to a number of these probably since the kickoff of these global meetings years ago, and I think we need to have some that's dedicated specifically to the workplace so we can sit and talk about what are the next steps, what are the actions we can all come together and bring more workplace people into this audience.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda.
And I totally agree on that one.
We were already in sync.
Yes, we were. A couple of concluding points, and so I just want to reiterate, we do have a performance potential, a human performance potential gap. With fundamentally changing ways of working, a fundamentally changing world of work, we need fundamentally new ways of thinking and ways of working. And what does that mean? We need to move from the almost obsessive focus on engagement in organizations to something called autonomic balance and physiological resilience. Many of you will understand what that means. It's about moving from extrinsic factors to intrinsic factors, what actually drives the human being and the human brain to work well. 80% of performance potential sit in your physiology as compared to 20% in the mental resilience that we typically focus on. That is key for HR and leaders to understand. So I think back to a conversation we had last night, we also, and to that pledge, it's also around not just having more neuroscientists, as someone talked about earlier today, it's also about massively upping up the game and awareness and understanding and knowledge across leaders and HR functions so that we truly can make a shift towards brain positive organizations, because we can't just change the label and put a new sticker on a person's role or title and hope that things will change.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Jackie?
I'll add one perspective. Where I've seen a positive change was with the work that I've done with Standard Chartered, where the chief finance officer was the executive sponsor of well-being. And that made a massive difference in the whole narrative in their organization. And they also talked about integrating brain skills like adaptability and resilience in the core curriculum of their employees. And so I think to get it in the boardroom, we need to think beyond the traditional paths and bring others in and find the right narrative to make it attractive. And so slot it into the strategy. Which can be done if you get those other stakeholders on board. Definitely if you get the finance officer on board, then you can really drive change.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think what we realized is that we're just beginning to really structure this approach to a brain positive organization. But I think we have lots of good ideas and a very strong motivation to also make it a central piece of reflection within the brain economy. So with that in mind, I would like to thank everyone on stage and in the audience. Apologies that not all the questions were included, but we have to now join colleagues downstairs for a very brief concluding session, and then the networking reception awaits us. Thank you so much. Thank you.